Welcome to this episode of Game and Earn. In today's video, we are going to go over some of the biggest gainers in terms of value over the last 30 days. Today, we are specifically going to be looking at Sony Consoles. We'll take a look at complete in-box games to see where you can make some profits. With that out of the way, let's get to it and find some ways to game and earn. Kicking off our video is one that I told you about in my 3 ways to earn more money video. I'm of course talking about Armored Core. But which one in particular? Well, how about all of them? I'll focus on just the first entry here, but as projected in that video, across the board, Armored Core titles have increased roughly 40% in value for all titles. The first entry in the Armored Core series came onto the PS1 all the way back in 1997, the year the Backstreet Boys decided to quit playing games with our hearts. Developed by the legendary, although not at the time, Brum Software, it was a 3D mech game that was difficult and rewarding, which seems to be a theme for their titles. But the real ticket here is that in December at the Game Awards, a new entry in the series was announced, Armored Core 6. Fans seem to have been inspired to play the older entries, even though the new title likely won't come out for at least a year, so they flocked to eBay and game stores to purchase older entries in the series. As I've said already, this usually lasts roughly a month, though I wouldn't expect this price point to stay this high, and it will likely come back down 20% or so by the springtime. If you have any copies you don't mind getting rid of, I'd be selling these titles now as the market has peaked for the time being, and you should be able to reacquire if need be down the road. Next, I'd like to cover something a bit different, where the value almost entirely derives from some people just not knowing what they have. That being the long box variants of titles, specifically Resident Evil. The PS1 largely released titles in the jewel case variants, as most CDs came in, but they also released a slew of titles in what is referred to as the long box variants. These boxes were roughly the same size and shape of Sega Saturn or Sega CD titles, and they were almost exclusively earlier print runs on the console. Eventually, Sony started pushing for games to be released in the smaller jewel cases we know and love to this day, but titles such as Doom, Kingsfield, Darkstalkers, and Resident Evil, and more, were released in the long box variants. Which moves us to the price point. Why is this going up seemingly for no reason? My belief is that this is a case of people mistaking the value of the long box variants as being the same as the jewel case games of the same title. Since Resident Evil had multiple releases in both formats, we see some people list this for under $100 when a long box variant goes for a bit more than that. Looking at the eBay sold section confirms my suspicions, as you can find a handful of sales even around the $50 price point. It must also be stated that condition is key, and the registration card for the long box titles appears to be rarer than that of the jewel case variants. With that being said, I think long box titles are a great way to make some money, because if you're active, you can sometimes snag this $130 title for right around $50. So we're going to go with a buy here. Moving forward now, let's cover a tactics game that was released on the PS1, Vandal Hearts 2. This title released a month before Y2K struck and destroyed the internet as we know it. Releasing exclusively on the PS1. Viewed as a disappointment for not living up to the original's quality, it didn't review particularly well. But usually, that's a recipe for value, and in this case, it certainly is. One of the many PS1 titles which spiked over $100 since COVID started, Vandal Hearts 2 has seen a brief dip as of late, dropping down to the low of $75 in early December. It has since then climbed back up to just below the $100 price point at the start of 2023. I can see a few reasons as to why this dropped, either from Tactics Ogre releasing in early November, or just a general lack of interest during the Christmas season, but either way, it appears to have corrected itself. I think the time to purchase this title has passed, and we should hold or sell if you have a copy and we're waiting to maximize your profit. Our last entry in the PS1 era for this video, let's cover a game that's a bit more affordable in Metal Gear Solid. The coming out party for legendary game designer Hideo Kojima, this stealth game changed the genre and was a massive success. Commonly regarded as one of the best PS1 games of all time, it sold over 7 million copies and is often found in lots you might find on Facebook or OfferUp. We're seeing something interesting with this title though, as the current price actually exceeds the all-time high set in April of 2021 when the last big spike price happened. It's a bit of an outlier, and other titles are seeing decent gains, but nothing like we're seeing percentage-wise for Metal Gear Solid. It could just be the game getting more organic attention, or maybe enough copies have finally found permanent homes to where the supply is just drying up, but I'm going to put my money on, once again, the Game Awards, where Hideo Kojima announced his next title, Death Stranding 2. And brief sidebar, did we really need a sequel to this? I mean, really. Anyways, that is my most likely cause, and due to that, the price will likely come back down to the normal $30 price range, so I'd be a seller anywhere above that. Moving on, we're going to cover a PS2 title which once eclipsed the $200 price point, and frankly shocked me when it dropped as much as it did. Def Jam Fight for New York. An iconic fighting game featuring some of the most popular rappers of all time, and for some unknown reason, Carmen Electra, Fight for New York has been an extremely sought-after title for the PS2. But in the last year or so, we've seen this title drop roughly 30% from its all-time high, and I'm not exactly sure why. Perhaps the lineup of rappers have aged out, with most of them certainly not releasing any quality music in quite some time, or maybe the shock factor has diminished, and the generation that didn't get Celebrity Deathmatch doesn't really get it.
Oh no! That's it! Jim's locked up Mariah in the legendary sleeper hold.
Either way, we can safely say this title is on the rise again, currently sitting at $166 for a complete in-box copy. And the beautiful thing about most PS2 titles is there aren't tons of inserts or posters. Most of them came with just a case, manual, and game disc. That's it.
It's so beautiful.
That makes finding a complete in-box copy much easier than other consoles from that era. For me, I'll be putting a buy/hold onto this, because if you can find a copy for $150, I'd be buying that and see it as good value. Finally, I'd like to cover an oft-ignored part of the reselling industry, sports titles, and specifically, we're going to cover NCAA Basketball 2010. The last title in the series released on both PS3 and Xbox 360, this is a sports title that people seem to go after when game hunting in thrift stores or pawn shops. And for good reason, I might add. In both 2021 and 2022, this title broke the $100 price point barrier. If you follow college basketball at all, you'll likely know where this is headed. But in both years, the price hit the peak in, you guessed it, April. It's not that surprising considering March Madness takes place right before and usually ends in the beginning of April each year. Looking at the data further, this is actually an insane trend that has occurred regularly as far back as price charting has been keeping data.
Jesus Christ, that right there is the mail. Now let's talk about the mail. Can we talk about the mail, please, Mac? I'm dying to talk about it.
So, while we're not quite at the peak, we're also not quite at the bottoming out part of the price. But with an average price currently of $75, we should expect another peak of around $100 right around the end of March, early April time period. That would give us a decent profit, so if we're able to snag some copies for just under the current price, that's probably what I'd do. So we're going to mark this as a buy and hold. And also a reminder to mark on the calendar to buy up copies of NCAA Basketball 10 in November of 2023 to maximize that profit. Alright, well that wraps up this month's Game & Earn video for the month of January for Sony systems all the way from PS1 to PS5. If you enjoyed the content, please make sure to like and subscribe and feel free to drop any comments with questions or suggestions. We plan on doing monthly videos for all major systems and more. Thanks again, and see you next time.